We are all in the naked absolute. We all quiver in our places of terror before the profound abyss of death. And it's just sort of that like, okay, how do we relax the posturing so those things can be cleansed and purified and reinvented in the image of love?
To me, that's what life is. That's what biology is a tension between life and death. Programmed cell death is constantly happening in our body. There's no growth without decay. There's no growth without tension.
But I feel that, the king archetype, right, is something that we all have within us, but for most men have been disconnected from and don't really maybe know where to look.
Even the word king now, it feels like it's ruined. Like how do we even reclaim the word king anymore without being patriarchal? Welcome back to The Boundless Body. So check this out. 63.5% of you who are regular listeners haven't subscribed yet to the show. So please take a moment. It would be really helpful to click subscribe. It's free of charge. It will really help us out. In turn, we'll help you out by bringing you better and better content. Along those lines, send us an email with your feedback, boundlessbodypod@gmail.com. Send us your feedback about how you think we can do better. Give us questions to address on the show, interviewees you'd like us to interview. It'd be super helpful. Okay. Let's be a community. I'm excited to welcome y'all to the Fireside Boundless Body Edition and excited to share with you my two buddies here. And I'm just going to read off, as is the case at the beginning of all my shows, their bios. So we're going to start with David Henry over here. David Henry Rickenbach is a transformational guide and visionary coach devoted to unlocking the unobstructed self-expression of unique genius. He holds an MA in psychological studies from the California Institute of Integral Studies, where his work focused on integrative, depth-oriented approaches to human flourishing. With a background in somatic psychology, contemplative practice, and psychedelic integration, David supports high-performing individuals in embodying their purpose, dissolving internal barriers, and stepping fully into their brilliance. Welcome, THR.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, excited to have this conversation. So this is Blake. Blake Chalfant is an active seeker, a student of life on a mission to help others remember who they are. He is currently a nomadic young men's coach, drawing from his BS in psychology, also from the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I teach, and his certification in integrative somatic trauma therapy. Blake is the author of The Unseen Way, a book on finding yourself in the modern world. The three of us were just part of a men's group where we were focused on the sovereign archetype, the king archetype. And we were really looking at what is a king in this modern era. We're looking at the pitfalls of even using the term king and how it just seems to be struck through with all these implications and wounding for people around what kings have done in the past. So let's see if we can bring some of this harvest of wisdom about the king. What are you tooling around in your minds with regarding the king archetype and the sovereign, guys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for starters, just as you're saying, like the king archetype is so wrought with peril, and it does evoke so many images that are so not helpful. And so really kind of finding our way, kind of blundering our way, even trickstering our way into what does the organization, the coherence of feeling like we're in our own, say, kingliness, feel like in a way that is kind of towing the line between hubris, confidence, uplifting each other, seeing the light and the joy in others, while at the same time holding a deep space for challenges and sorrows and griefs. It's really kind of an interesting exploration, because it feels like this is a time where we need such grounded leadership. We're going through such like a perilous time. And so the call to leadership is a strong call. And I think it's one we're all kind of figuring out together right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's such a felt sense for me, like the feeling of the king. And I think coming off of this weekend, something that I'm thinking a lot about regarding the king is how can we be in a room where we're all the king versus like the king as this one person in the village, but how to be in a room full of men where we're all embodying our king. And so then it's breaking these like hierarchical paradigms of it's like, if this person's the king, then I must be, lower than them or something like this. And so it's how do we uplift and see the king within each other? And I think what that really calls in is this process of like unfurling who we are and then learning to fully appreciate that, because you're going to have a different flavor of the king than I am. And so are you. And in our culture, we kind of, I think, have selected for a very narrow version of like a king or a leadership kind of position. And so then I think it leaves a lot of men and a lot of people, because we all have the king, right? It leaves a lot of people like feeling like, well, why don't I have that? Because your king looks different than mine, because this selected version of what the king should look like looks different than mine. So I think for me, I'm really sitting with like how to see my king, even if it looks different than your king, or if it looks different than our cultural models of what a king should look like.
Yeah. So we talked on the weekend about one of the functions of the royal. That's a non-gendered image of this archetypal space, the royal. And I was saying how we were talking about how the blessing, the capacity to bless and the capacity to receive a blessing is central to the archetype of the king and to the royal. And to me, this is a really deep thing, because blessing is different than like a compliment, right? Like there's various people that have like a kind of compliment allergy. You say, oh yeah, I like your pants, DHR, David Henry Rickenbach, DHR. You'll hear me say DHR. I love your pants, man. Your pants are just great. And that's like a compliment. And some people have like a really bad allergy to compliments. In fact, in psychotherapy work, that's a significant aspect of the work, because they have like what I call a sovereign wound. They don't have their self-image is a bit bent out of shape. And so they can't take in a compliment. But to me, the deeper structure, the deeper element of this archetypal terrain of the royal is the phenomenon of the blessing. Okay, because a blessing is much deeper, right? A blessing is much deeper than a compliment. It's not going to be about your pants. It's going to be about your character. It's going to have to do often with a vulnerability that you have, or a wound that you've worked through, and you've received a boon. You received a type of power. And I think that the sovereign has a lot to do with how we access and channel power. And blessing is a type of power. And also receiving a blessing is like a circuit. We were talking about this circuit. Like in order to give a good and a powerful blessing, you need to have the capacity to receive a blessing and therefore be vulnerable. So let's riff a bit on vulnerability and what that has to do with the sovereign and the royal archetype. What have you all learned about that? And let's just plug into that blessing zone.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're saying about being able to receive a blessing is really significant. And it really ties in for me really deeply to this other concept that we were riffing on around really holding space for our inner quivers, or this deep sense that like we feel, say, fear, we feel vulnerability. Being amongst other men can be really scary. And I think for myself, there's been such a journey around really finding myself in spaces where I feel like I can trust and receive, and like the direction that another man will take something is congruent with my self-image, or it's congruent with the way I understand love to flow. And I think that kind of blessing that like really good men can offer each other is kind of born out of sort of a willingness of being receptive, a sort of attunement, a sense of deep care, a generosity of presence. And it's less of like, say, some recreation of like a machismo thing of like one-upping each other, as you were kind of pointing to, and more of like really, I think, this sort of altruistic engagement of like, how does my love empower their love? How does this blessing empower their blessing? And the quality of being receptive to someone's vulnerability and what wounds it might be touching on, or what grievances they might have, and being willing to offer that blessing and actually feel like how it actually really lands inside of someone, and kind of take that next step in that journey of like not just say a blessing and then I'm off. It's more like a blessing and I see that now your voice is shaking, or that lands in something that maybe is both of the essence of the wound, but also of the essence of what's ready to be nourished, what's ready to kind of come through more, and what comes alive in them having received a blessing. So that's sort of this interesting entanglement, I feel, between like our vulnerabilities and healing, and then also really offering empowerment that can land and actually really serve a greater purpose that's just not, say, like for one's own self-interests.
Yeah, this quiver experience I find is just so central. Over years, I think I've developed this capacity to sit in my quiver, where my lip is quivering a little bit and I might be on the edge of tears. And I've seen so many men get to that place of the quivering lip, and then they just use some sideshow story to kind of circumvent and kind of hit the ejection seat away out of the quiver, because that is such a vulnerable place to be, to just like sit there in it without trying to get anywhere and try to get out of it because it's uncomfortable. There's this wonderful phrase called "in touch with the naked absolute." The phrase "laid bare" is an interesting, because it indicates vulnerability, right? Laid bare. And if I lay myself bare, and one of the things that lays me bare is asking for, or just we were talking about needy little boy, like all of us have a needy little boy. And when I ask for a need, like a deep need, for example, for a blessing, I'm not asking for a compliment. It's going to be with a man that I trust and I admire and I vibe with. But when I lay myself bare and ask for a blessing, and I turn to you, Blake, because I admire and respect you, and I say, would you please bestow upon me? And it sounds formal and weird. Would you bestow on me a blessing? It's almost like, what are we in the medieval era or something like that? But there's something ardent about it. There's something that's what it is about archetypes. They're ancient, right? And I lay myself bare. It's like, will you bless me? And it's vulnerable because in a way, narcissistic culture, narcissistic discourse just says, like to be great or something like that, or the yearning to be great, or the neediness to be seen as being wonderful and unique and special gets kind of being pathologized. And then so this yearning to be blessed and to deliver blessing, and that type of power then just gets pathologized. And then so I'm stuck with my needy little boy going, I just really want Blake's blessing because I like this guy, I admire him. But it can be this laid bare moment of, okay, how is he really going to respond to me? Because I've been wounded when I've asked for that stuff in the past by like a tyrant king, right? Who in my vulnerable moment when I'm laid bare is going to fuck me up. And just while I'm vulnerable, boom.
Going through with what you were saying about like the circuit, how it's kind of this circuit of, in order to really be able to receive or to give, like you have to kind of be able to lean into the other. But for me, the way that I really am seeing this, and as you're talking about, it's a perfect example of asking to be blessed. Like that's the most vulnerable thing, especially as men, that we could kind of possibly do. But I see it as like, just using the king, I see it as this drawbridge and the willingness to lower the drawbridge. But I feel that is actually what sets the circuit in motion initially, is the being willing to lower the drawbridge of our vulnerability before the blessing process even happens. And then once the drawbridge is lowered and the vulnerability is being shown and being brought into the space, that's when this, maybe the desire to bless naturally arises, or that initial seed within us of me seeing you. And that's what I share in the blessing. That arises out of a moment when you lower your drawbridge. And it feels like it's setting this kind of self-organizing process in motion of when we gather in vulnerable spaces. Like it feels like this act of the blessing, when the vulnerability and the drawbridges are being lowered, it's like, it's just naturally wanting to happen. It's naturally wanting to be shared.
I love that. And I'm feeling into what is the region in my body that's correlated, or is there one area, maybe it's all throughout, when my drawbridge is lowering, where could that map onto in my body? And I think a lot of what, like from a somatic psychology standpoint, a lot of the cluster fucks happen here in the jaw and in the face.
Yeah.
Because it's like our aggression. We're so primed to be in these hierarchies where there's this one-upmanship, and we're just so ready to defend. And like, is this guy gonna? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm actually thinking as one of the first ports of call, like a softening through here.
Yeah.
I say, like, one of the jolly weird things that I say on the podcast is our job is to unfuck the face. And because we're so struck through with, like curated facial stuff and, Facebook and polished stuff. It's just, smashing through the face of the inauthentic or the posturing. I think that's a good port of call here. It's like drawbridge down. But also I think we've been wounded by a kind of like internalized homophobia too. Because I think, weirdly enough, I think that there's something in the king and the wounds to the king and the wounds to the sovereign amongst us men that is actually erotic. And I'm saying that as like a revelation, like that's a kind of weird idea for me in this moment. Like you can't fully have a sovereign unless you're willing to be in an erotic space with men. And I don't mean, like in order to have a blessing, we need to like kiss and get it on or something like that. But like a love that is like, yeah, bro, man, I love you. I don't, it sounds a little bit ridiculous maybe, but it's occurring to me as a revelation that Eros is an important piece.
Absolutely. One of the pieces that I'm really struck by, especially around, say, the somatic view of like how we hold tensions, how those start to, say, build like what might be called in like the Reichian sense, like body armoring, sort of things that are sort of seizing up inside of us, these places where we have these holding patterns and these tension patterns. And there's a fun little somatic sort of semantic play on like masculinity and this kind of felt sense of like, why is the king so perilous? It's because we have all these kind of pseudo versions or all these fake versions, or something in the self gets propped up of like, I'm going to behave like a king now. And like, there's a type of new age spirituality, which is so repulsive of like dudes just like running this sort of pseudo awake version of like the divine masculine or like their king archetype. And it's just like, like it's so gross. And so that felt sense of being able to come into like what's really relaxing inside of the body and what's really becoming, say, like receptive to blessings. And in a way, kind of building from the ground up in terms of like, say, like the authentic self, the sense that like we're revealing our true selves, and that in of itself is like a beautiful mask. It's not necessarily like the truest self. It's just the creative iteration that's moving through like today and this season of my life. Like this is how I look. This is how I feel. This is the gestures that move through me. And knowing at this point, and, we were kind of touching on this too. It's just like, during the men's week and like the many seasons of like we go through, it's just like really cultivating a space of like, hey, if you're like in the arena, if you're like you're rising to the occasion to really try something bold and daring and creative and to really bring that forward, like you'd be making a lot of mistakes. And so there's an interesting sort of masculinity culture around like, like that's the mask that's emerging inside of you in this season of life. And how do we love that and honor that? And maybe also kind of give each other that little wink, wink that like the emperor has no clothes. We are all in the naked absolute. We all quiver in our places of terror before the profound abyss of death. I certainly do. Yeah. And it's just sort of that like, okay, like how do we relax the posturing so those things can be cleansed and purified and reinvented in the image of love. And I think part of what we do for men is we love each other. And then in that love, it's like, oh my gosh, I can like look at the places inside of me that are like so insecure or so scared or so like riddled with self-doubt, and actually be like, oh, like in this reflection of this kind of love or this kind of brotherhood, that doubt, that insecurity, that fear is, beautiful. It's sacred energy. Maybe it's a part of the Eros energy of just like how life is trying to reproduce itself through our creative expressions. And yet, with all that said, it's like, I think there's a really organic recreation process that happens when we kind of look for that sort of deep somatic view of what is the body's innate sort of wisdom here as we're relaxing and blessing and then uplifting each other. Yeah.
Sparking so much for me. One is kind of tying in the structure, anti-structure piece a little bit with these pseudo versions of the king and things like this. But, what I was really hearing you talk about in the beginning was a lot of these pseudo versions of the king in our culture that are kind of these, bros who are just like stepping on, like, I'm doing this thing now, and kind of this like faking it till you make it kind of energy. And which is great, like you're saying, but then eventually, maybe the anti-structure flood comes and wipes out the foundation. But I feel that, the king archetype, right, is something that we all have within us. But for most men have been disconnected from and don't really even maybe know where to look. And I feel like such an amazing space to start to like feel into that place within yourself is in these quiver spaces. Is in these spaces where we really are allowed to fall apart, are allowed to crumble in our own way in a culture where we're supposed to always stand strong everywhere else. Like these spaces where we can crumble, because it's in that space of the crumbling and in the cracking where like things begin to get to seep through this newfound strength and foundation, this place, that king.
Just for the audience, the structure versus anti-structure was articulated by this great writer, Victor Turner, the great anthropologist. And he was looking at ritual processes and how that there's like this primordial tension in culture. One element, one vector, one force in culture and in systems builds up structure. Like, for example, in status quo hierarchies where you have a king or a royal figure. And this isn't just Western civilization. This is throughout the world where you have hierarchical structures, structure being the key word there, and then periodic ritualizations of the opposite, anti-structure, where you have, and it's often the trickster figure, you have crazy shit happening where the rigidities that tend to crystallize in those hierarchical structures are exposed and dissolved. Okay. So, and the idea is that if the anti-structural element doesn't come in, we're going to have rigidity, significant rigidities. And to me, when I'm in a group where there is a leader, now I really do believe that we do have a yearning to idealize. That's part of the structure of the archetype. And that's why gurus will always be a thing. And that's why, hierarchies with the lead shaman at the top, who's a royal magician figure, they're always going to be around. Why? One of the reasons why is because we have a yearning to idealize. And then, like, over time, though, one of the things that can happen if there's not conscious ritualization of the other, the anti-structural thing, that person at the top will become rigid, pompous, unethical, and and in popular culture now it's called mansplaining, right? Mansplaining, where it's just like there's the royal scepter, and that mansplainer is just there at the top of the hierarchy, just saying the things. And then, of course, what that requires, it's like a field of energy flows, where let's say I'm the one holding the scepter, and I'm the PhD guy, or I'm the lead shaman or something, and y'all start to just bring those idealizing projections towards me, and I just absorb them. Yeah. And that bolsters up and creates my structure, and gradually over time I become rigid.
Yeah.
And somatically, where do I think that shows up? In the anus. Okay? In the anus. Okay? I really do think it's the anus. That is literally the sphincter. You know what I'm saying? And you can actually feel a field where there's just tight sphincters, right? And it's like it all feels just so like excessively pure, where there's like, I like to talk about hidden claims to innocence. Hidden claims to innocence. Well, like, yeah, I'm in a pure group, and there's this hidden claim to innocence that we are the pure ones, and then the ones that are in the out group, they're the impure. God, yeah. And that's when the trickster, the anti-structural element, we were talking about this before, where the anti-structural element in me is just ready to come in. I went to a workshop one time where the rules were you couldn't cross your arms. arms. It was a somatic workshop. The rules were that, like if you cross your arms, then that means you're closed off to the world. Mm-hmm. And if you cross your legs, that means you are closed off to the world. But the thing is that the whole structuralization process made me like my soul squint and my sphincter squint. Yeah. And I couldn't even breathe in there. So my trickster, I was like really looking for a place to ruffle the feathers, because that's what the trickster does. It gets that anti-structural thing going.
Yes.
So the king, like in terms of the archetypal theory, the trickster is opposite, and literally an opposite force. It's the king and the royal builds up structure, lifts people up, like the archetypal image of the king. Often when you read about the father archetype of the king, is to lift up a child to the heavens. It's called elevation. So blessing, elevation, and initiation. Initiation is often carried forward by the magician energy, right? Where you have the neophyte at the bottom rung of the ladder, and then the initiator is often a magician figure, right? So I would say that the two are blessing and elevation, and then vulnerability has got to be in there. But elevation, right? To think about it, that when we're in that space, if you're willing to be in that quiver, in that vulnerable space, then, and you bring a little bit of that idealization element, because I need to hold something in order to lift you up and elevate you. And in a weird sort of way, you're kind of like that baby that I'm holding up to the precious heavens. Like, this is the precious jewel that is David Henry and Blake. I'm just doing that. And it is a circuit. Yeah, but it can be enticing and intoxicating to be in that place. It takes an ethical responsibility, and I think psychological inquiry to not just get kind of feast off of those narcissistic nutriments and just like, give me more, because I can feel that in me, right? I don't know if you can feel that in you, that craver. It's like, give me more of that. Give me more.
Yeah. Whoo! It's potent.
I feel like the tie-in with initiation is really interesting with the king. It was something that I was thinking about. Not that I know, but I would love to kind of explore this, because you probably know more than I do about this. But my intuition here is that a part of the initiatory practice in these other cultures for young men was to wake up the king archetype in a way. And so, we're talking about the king archetype in a culture where we haven't had initiation and things like this. And so I'm just feeling into the part of the king that maybe is earned in some way, and holds like a responsibility. And it's not something that maybe we just say, now I'm a king. Now that I know about this king archetype, now I'm the king. Like there's it holds checks and balances in a way. It calls us into, and there's the responsibility to hold that. And so maybe sometimes it's like, I was kind of slipping from my inner king in the way that I know that I can lead in that way. And I think that's an important thing to think about.
With power comes responsibility. And I'm thinking about just how words get these associations, and the sovereign wound in the person, which it gets collapsed into this, who's that guy? Peter Berger, is that his name? He talked about this collapse of the sacred canopy, where you have the king is involved in a cosmology, in a universe, right? And narcissism discourse just is a flatland discourse. It doesn't have this expansive quality of, we're talking about the power of creation here. You know what I mean? And narcissism discourse does not account for that. Yeah. And we're so wounded, right? But by toxic masculine figures who don't have that deep connection with the divine and the creator spirit, whatever that is, in a kind of reverence. But then also the patriarchs who do that, and then, subjugate people. Yeah. And then so even the word king now, it feels like it's ruined. You know, like how do we even reclaim the word king anymore without being patriarchal? I mean, one of my jokes is it's like you can go to like a dance, ecstatic dance, or you can do one of these hippy dippy dances, and the women can say, "Oh, we're the goddesses," or something like that. But if us guys are like going to the corner, it's like, well, okay, we're the gods.
We're the kings.
We're the kings.
Yeah.
It starts to it's really easy to read that as arrogant.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost like we're primed to like backpedal of even saying it at all. And because masculine power has been so subjugating, so horrible. There's so much wounding to it. It's almost like it's a double bind. It's like we can't live without that.
Yeah.
But to claim it is now just like it's a mess to claim it.
So vulnerable.
Well, that's the other side of it too, because it's to step into that power. One side of it is it's like, like you're going to be seen as a subjugator. The other side of it is you're going to get all these projections about being arrogant and you're going to be envied. You know.
Such a strong like somatic sensation of looking over my shoulder and fearing that like someone behind me that's about to stab me as I claim the king in public or whatever this is. It's like who's going to be there, And I feel like that's why having such a strong brotherhood with other people who are holding that same vibration and who are on that same walk is so important. Like people in your corner that you can look to that'll call you out on your bullshit, that'll also say like keep going.
Keep going.
I'm behind you. Like I'm walking right by side with you.
Yeah. I remember on this weekend, like saying some stuff and being like, holy shit, I'm brilliant. And I'm afraid of being brilliant, and yet it's like, holy shit, I'm brilliant. Whoa, I just said it. And then, just being seen for that, but also feeling that other side. Because one man even mentioned it. And one man even named the word envy, which I was like, yes, envy is in the space. Somebody said it. Because with power, I like to, when I'm riffing on this stuff with students, I like to say, hey, it is irresponsible for us to just talk about powering up and like consider that that's like somehow neutral without like saying that if you power up, there's a certain percentage of people that are going to be envious. It's just going to elicit envy. And that looking over the shoulder thing, it's like, oh, I just said something that's brilliant. And the axe is going to fall now by some envious person that wants to, rather than see me and bless me, which I feel with the two of you very clearly, like brilliance is coming through and you're like, okay, I got it. Give me some more. And here I'm going to add some of mine. And I'm like, give me some more. And it's like a feast. It's like, there's so much to go around. It's like potlatch ceremony or something like that. It's like, let's have a feast. Bring it on. And there's a sense that we're not being arrogant, right? It's like, we're just playing.
Well, this for me really brings in, I feel like one of the entanglements I've been really kind of looking at very closely here is the entanglement of the magician or the wizard and the king. And I think one of the interesting things about the magician archetype, or where that starts to say play with people who are connected to a mystical path or, the sort of different realms of spirit. For me, the way I was thinking about it recently is there's the sort of precipitation of conflict. Like someone says something and it elicits envy, and like you can kind of feel in the body there's like these subtle agitations, these subtle irritations, like you're annoyed. It's like, oh, like I don't know, can I get with this program? And there's something about the magician archetype that's like a part of the tracking of like irritation, annoyance, like aggression. It's just like, bring it on. And the sort of movement that I was really playing with, and still I am kind of playing with, is this kind of way in which conflict can give way to confluence. And like the conflict is like that precipitation of primal energy that's just like it wants to fuck and it wants to kill and it wants to take over, and it's like epic energy. And yet that's also the energy that can harm. And so there's this interesting play between like, how do we work the way of conflict? Like, how does, say, a magician come with his brotherly kin, or how does a wizard enter into a field and maybe even with a deep friendship with the trickster and the humors and the sort of aha, guffaw, chuckalummalisses that are just sort of like the, like, you know, you said the truth so fast it made me laugh kind of places that give way to the sense of like, oh, we're in confluence now. There's these different streams and there's sort of this vortex now, or this sort of way in which the ecosystem is sort of vibrating the sense of now there's genius in the field of like, like I don't need to attack you. Like I can actually circulate this energy, or I can kind of come into something that's maybe reflective of like a higher image or a deeper embodiment. And then that kind of can start to play and harmonize.
Yeah. I like the term creative tension. You know, a lot of systems, when the tension starts to build, the tension reduction function, I like almost like as a rescuer dynamic, like rescuing the field, rescuing the system from tension by saying something wise, or like somehow derailing it by bringing it in a direction of talking about the dogmatic beliefs or the traditions of that particular group, which is actually kind of a sideshow away from the tension that's actually building in the space.
Yeah.
That tension might be envy. You know, like you just said something that was so clear, and it was clearer than what I felt like how I was saying my thing. And I'm just like, I want to get, you know, and then I'll say something passive aggressive, and then you'll get pissed or something, and then building, and then somebody just takes the talking stick and they take it in the direction of talking about, you know, traditional spirituality or something like that. But to me, the real force, you know, is the force of tension that struck into the fabric of the universe and our bodies. You know, to hold the tension, to cultivate the capacity to hold the lightning of tension without having to go into sideshows or rescuing dynamics or soapboxing about the high idealized transcendent thing. That's all just, you know, an escape from the creative tension, creative potential. It's a framework for this stuff, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I think it really speaks to, for me, the sort of leveling force of true creativity, in the sense that, like, you know, it's so easy in our culture, and it feels like it's often the case that we want to say, like, those people over there, they have the power and we're the powerless ones. Or like in psychology jargon, we talk about like learned helplessness, or the sense of, you know, like kind of abiding in like a certain kind of trauma discourse. And there's something really powerful about somehow playing a role of being like, the more you hold this idealized image, you know, the modern day kings, right? Elon or Trump, or, you know, these people are like, they hold the power. It's so interesting how deeply disempowering that is from cultivating our own inner images. And I think the classic thing is, it's like being sort of the armchair philosopher or something, and you can just kind of sit back and that's the problem with them, and that's the problem with them, and that's the problem with them. And it takes so much more to enter into the arena ourselves and to put our heart on the line and to be willing to be wrong, like countless times, to be willing to make mistakes, like countless times. And then kind of, as Blake was you speaking to, just like, and then finding those who are in the arena with us. And like you had this phrase, Brian, that was just like, like it was like the unpredictable, or like the unforeseen alliances. And I feel like that has so much juice for me, because it feels like this image that I got from Indiana Jones, where like, you know, like we're on this sort of mythopoetic like threshold, you know, like we're taking a precipice and kind of cast some dust out. Like we know that we need to cross to this mysterious place where there's something deep that we want to go for. And it's like, we can kind of see there's a step, but it's like each step is like that crazy sort of like movement into the unknown. And I feel like there's sort of an individual kind of quality to that. But then there's also, I feel like on the collective level, it's like there's this movement into like, is the person that I'm with, are they trustworthy? Is the person I'm talking to, are they trustworthy? And I think as trust builds, then we find these sort of unforeseen alliances where we're like, wow, I've cast myself into the arena, I've gone all in, I'm, you know, taking all that comes with it. And now here are the brothers I find in the arena.
Yeah. with Blake, I remember that my prelude, my check-in at the men's group was something like, I'm fucking sick of being polite. And the unforeseen alliance thing was like, Blake, you came up to me, I don't know, sometime later, a few hours later or something like that. And you were like, dude, I was all in with you when you said that, because it was an immediate alliance around that stuff, like the politeness, the edifice, and that we connected around this wildness alliance. And I brought in this image of the jaguar as a killer, and I felt like I was a jaguar, and you were just like, bring it on.
Yeah.
Bring out, it's like to move through intolerable images together, because that dark stuff is in the psyche. Yeah. And when I bring a dark image, of where I'm at in my shadows, and a man can just sit there and go like, I see you there. Yeah. And you're not going to other me as being impure. I'm not feeling that from you. Yeah. We have an alliance now that we can touch that fierceness and we can create from that place. And you're not going to go into some transcendental position about this ideology or that ideology or the dopamine hypothesis. And we're doing, Andrew Huberman or something like that. No, we're in that fierceness and doing the dance.
Yeah. You could have shared a 30-minute dialogue on your life story, and just in that 30 seconds of being real, that you're tired of being nice, and that I trusted you. Like, I trusted you on such a deep level in that 30 seconds of what you shared, versus some hour-long spiel. It's just like, I know that I can lean on this guy. I know that I can trust that he's going to be real with me. I know that I can trust that he's being real with himself and his experience. And we're harping on tension and the gifts that it brings. And I say this a lot and I talk about it a lot. And I think what I'm super interested in is how we can actually do that, because it's one thing to talk about it, but then it's a whole other thing to actually, really do that. And I just feel the call in such a strong way, and to continue to live that, because tension's everywhere. When you start to open your eyes, it's everywhere. To really lean into that, it feels like everything.
Yeah. I think there can be such this deep impulse. And I was having a conversation with a colleague just the other day. And, one thing that seems to move through a lot is this deep desire to just be good enough. And in a way, it feels like I just want to be good enough. It's sort of like this relaxation impulse. Like, I just want to feel like I can relax into like this basic sense of like, I'm already here. I already have everything I need. And it's so interesting to contend with, because on the one hand, I feel like I want to encourage people to feel like they're enough. I want to feel like I'm enough. And I feel like there's some sort of deeper relaxation instinct within that that's powerful and trustworthy and generative and all this good thing. And yet there's something about being present to these tensions that is so like of the essence of true growth. And part of me wonders, and maybe you two have some insights into this, but like part of me really wonders if there's just no such thing as growth without pain. And like there needs to be some kind of radical embrace of like things that are worthwhile to be in pain around.
Well, it's great. This is something that Blake and I connected on, the embryo, the universe is an embryo. And my studies of embryology, scientific studies of embryology, yielded this wonderful phrase, no growth without tension. And to me, that clocks. Like, when bodies are built, there's fields that are corrosive. Literally corrosive, where you have metabolic fields in the embryo that kind of clash and create corrosions that signal programmed cell death. You know what I mean? So death, like we start out when we're growing our arms and our hands with paddles, and corrosion fields actually give us our digits. So, like my joke is like, our hands are forged of death. You know what I mean? Because it to me, that's what life is. That's what biology is a tension between life and death. Programmed cell death is constantly happening in our body right now. There's no growth without decay. There's no growth without tension. And that's the fact of biology in my books and psychology as well. And like the alchemical tradition has a wonderful map for that. I was talking about putrefaction, where you have like this innocence of the whitening. So like in the process of growth, you start with confusion where things are like, all gnarly and kind of thrown together and in a massive confusion. And then you start to apply heat, and that heat is through the tension of consciousness, the tension of whatever inner conflicts there are. And you apply heat in the various containers that life affords us in our personal growth process. And apply heat, and boom, you start to go towards what the alchemists call a whitening. And this is where the royal can kind of ascend out of the massive confusion. But the danger is that in that whitening, color symbolism tells us that the white is equated with false innocence. Not just false innocence. There's a beauty and a purity that goes with encountering the white, where like in my 20s or something like that, I had this noble posture of sitting in meditation where it really did feel pure and innocent to me in terms of my early awakenings and my kind of feeling of accelerating my consciousness and moving forward and growing. But then what Hillman was just so brilliant at doing is he just kicked the whiteness in the face and basically saying, you can camp out there for the rest of your life in being a royal innocent. I am the pure. My in-group that I am a part of is the pure and the innocent. Yeah. And what really needs to happen in order to progress, according to Hillman and the great thinkers, is you need to get rotted. And that's the yellowing stage where there's a seed of rot in every element of innocence. And so we really got to check ourselves when we're like, even in a domestic argument, right? Where we're in that thing where you started it. No, yeah, you started it. And then you tell me you started it. And if you think about it, right, it's a claim to innocence, right? It's
right. I'm innocent.
I'm innocent. And, like we're innocent in our like sacred ceremony space or something like that. And those, the uninitiated, they're the impure. Yes. And really, the rot, the seed of rot is in every container. It is in every container. And it actually leads us towards growth. It's that mushroom of spore. It's the spore. It's the rotting that then allows us to actually bring good humor into the space. Yeah. And this is where I really admire your leadership and feel like we're really dancing in this space of we're cool with the rotting, and it ain't always pretty. But when things start to get into that, okay, there's a whitening in the space and it feels good. It does feel pure. Yeah. It does feel holy. It feels wonderful. But to look over at you and know that you got that trickster seed rot thing going, and you can go into that space and we can tear down structures and laugh about sphincters and talk about flying coyote dicks and shit like that. Yeah. That's when I really come alive, because the whitening can feel like a trap, right? I'm just now when I go to a container that's whitewashed and it's all like pure and all, I just can't breathe. Where's the rot? And then so I kind of hold that function of the rotting, and then I get scapegoated. Right, which is the classical operation, right? Yeah. Here, intruder who's rotting, who's trying to rot this place. So come on, get out of here. Get out of here. Yeah. Whoa. Yeah.
I'm feeling into just like the nourishment that can come through the rotting. Like there feels like maybe there's like this initial discomfort and maybe it's ruffling feathers, but then that feels like there is this availability of like this deep well of nourishment within that. Like it just, and maybe it's even below this good, bad dichotomy. It just like is soulfully rich and it's like nourishing some aspect of us. But this phrase that I keep thinking about that the quiver initially sparked is like the wild other. I don't remember who said that, but the wild other. And that's what I think about what lies on the other side of the drawbridge when we lower the drawbridge. It's this wild other. and our willingness to let in the wild other and to dance with the wild other. And so you talking about so many people in our culture who, see Donald Trump or whoever as the king and who have totally outsourced our power. The way that I've kind of thought about that is like, we live in a culture where there's like a middleman. There's like a middleman between me and God, or me and my power, or me and whatever. And so we outsource everything to this middleman. And then we're kind of just left like going through the motions very unconsciously. And gosh, I just think about how many people on some level are so craving this encounter with the wild other. And when we talk about the meaning crisis, and I just want to feel fulfilled and I want to feel purpose and that spark in my life, I feel like such a deep part of that well that is empty for so many people is where the wild other was supposed to go. Like this source of aliveness that comes through our intimacy with the wild other. And
yeah, I love that. It brings a image for me that borders on the intolerable. And I'm saying that for myself, but also for the audience, that because when you bring in wildness, it's almost like we kind of approach the margins of taboo, because wildness can be equated with chaos. There's a deep primordial fear in the human in regards to chaos. Like the earliest ritual practices were probably, in various ways structured to ward off chaos. So, and there's a quickening in me. It's like the wild other. I know and love, and to some extent fear the wild other in me, because I've seen him kind of do his thing. Right? And it's exciting. It's edgy. It brings this all sorts of possibilities for the conversation. That image, like transgression. What is transgression? What is taboo? And then this curious juxtaposition that came up on the weekend about what could the relationship between wildness and faith be? That came as a revelation to me. Is like, what an interesting juxtaposition. What would wild faith be? How do you process that juxtaposition, guys? Like, where does that take you?
Yeah. For me, it kind of lands me into the philosophy of David Deutsch. I don't know if I've riffed with you on David Deutsch, but I love his kind of conception. I think this was him riffing on Karl Popper, who was, just deep into the kind of, what's it called? You know what you know, like not ontology, epistemology. Just deep into this epistemology of just like, how do humans really know what we know? And like one of the things that he elucidated for me, which has been so helpful, is just like taking the sort of deep context of fallibility. Like we don't really ever fully know anything. So there's this sort of like nod to like infinity, kind of a quantum physics sense of like, we're dealing with infinity is here. And then kind of in that, this idea of like certain knowledges can be helpful. They can build things, we can grow, and they can lead to one thing or another. But ultimately, the knowledge game itself is the sort of infinite horizon. And the piece that I feel like is really alive for me around the Deutsch philosophy, and something that I've kind of resonated a lot with when it comes to sort of meeting the wild unknown, is how he speaks to optimism. And there's this feeling from listening to him that like the kind of like stance of optimism is one in which one just sort of like plays with this possibility that like our, say, capacity to discover things that will be helpful, solutionary, bring a sense of like life or progress, is always kind of a larger horizon than, say, any sort of like pessimism. And I know for myself that kind of version of optimism has sort of been like a anchoring kind of like epistemological, like sort of stake in the ground in terms of like most things, everything I don't really know. And yet like something deeply foundationally inside of me takes faith that like, regardless, I'm going to be optimistic.
Beautiful. You know, one of my heroes is Walt Whitman.
Oh.
And my encounter with Walt Whitman, the way that I describe it is he is the person who's done arrogance the most responsibly that I've ever met or seen. And I mean arrogance in the sense of arrogate means to inflate and to expand. Okay, to inflate. And one of the things about Whitman is that he's a deeply humble man. I mean, he was a nurse in the Civil War. You know what I mean? And he just saw the beauty in people and wrote his poetry about it, and just way ahead of his time in terms of kind of multiculturalism and seeing the beauty in people in different walks of life, and just this exquisite optimism. And he can stand on a mountain and just be like, you know, the North and the South are mine, and the East and the West are mine, and I inhale great draughts of space. Okay, and he's in the space of nothing could be better than death. And he's not saying that from, you know, like hating life or anything like that, or loving death in the sense of negation, but like just this positivity and optimism. He's my hero in the camp of optimism. And you've been my hero along those lines as well. So I guess that's coming a bit from Sprechen Sie Deutsch. But just that resilient optimism that isn't, I don't know, flaky or crumbly or rigid, but it has that wildness to it, and which Whitman definitely has that wildness, right? He's like, we are sounding the barbaric yawp, you know, you know, we can just have our balls as men with Whitman and be wild out in the forest and have faith in each other that we can call each other into being better. We can just be in that space of being better, not through being jerks or dicks or whatever, but through being kind, through being imaginative, being fierce. Awesome.
In some ways, it feels connected to the king. Because, you know, the king needs to be the one in the village who has the optimism, has the faith and the hope. And it's not to say that he is like that 24/7, but maybe a part of him is like that 24/7 all the time. That deep place within them. And I feel like that the quote that you shared, something along the lines of real faith is found in the forge of faithlessness, or something like this.
Yeah, real hope is found in the forge of hopelessness.
Yeah.
That feels so important, and kind of this piece of anti-structure and the tension and that the rotting, and like this is what's found in that space. Real hope, real faith, like the deep connection to that the king, the one who can hold the village, the one who can, you know, walk with his heart open even in moments where people are pointing at him or in a really dark night.
You know, thinking about what are you're flipping the script or flipping the coin, and I'm thinking about what are the consequences of domestication. What are the consequences of certainty? The consequences of knowing. To me, they're all kind of related, you know, in this picture of an impoverished togetherness. There's really a sense of an impoverishment, and that the sign of a healthy coral reef is biodiversity. You know what I mean? And so this image of the king, I'm thinking about the diverse ways that the king shows up in a village. The royal shows up in a village as a mobile principle. That's often equated with the magician. But now I'm thinking about the king on a broomstick. Or like we were joshing before, but I guess it really is joshing because it comes from Josh, the Emerald guy, right? We were joshing around before about flying coyote dicks being a hilarious image on the Emerald for the mobile principle of the trickster. But I'm thinking about the royal needing to be mobile as well in order to not get all crystallized in one figure, so that the royal is like, we're students of the royal, we're students of the king. The king moves through. When it's healthy, that's the revelation that I'm on the edge of right now. That we're in contact with the royal. The royal moves through us. It likes to be mobile. It's the healthiest when it's mobile, and it also likes to sit. Doesn't like the trickster, I think, is pretty much always on the move. You know, a real flying coyote dick. You know, it's like, but the royal, I think, it likes to sit. Hence the danger of the crystallization, the subjugation, the structural, the idealization dynamics that people get, you know, swept away. I get swept away in grandiose ideas about. Where really, in the end, we end up just being a bit domesticated and then pruning our wild edges.
Maybe the sitting is sitting in the acknowledgement that it needs to be mobile.
Yeah.
And sitting in the truth that our connection and our intimate dance with the wild other is essential. Because I feel like as long as we are in that dynamic dance with this wild other, and we're staying open to this fresh current of life, there's always going to be something moving, something breaking, something shifting, something transforming. Like it negates the crystallization process, but there's a deeper crystallization process that's actually happening within our connection to this wild other, to our recognition of this part of life and the importance of it.
We were talking before about there's these powerful things said that happen in moments like this. We're saying powerful things. There's powerful images that are brought through. And there can be an aboutism, meaning we can topple into talking about stuff, and then therefore distance from the very powers that we're bringing through. So my curiosity in this moment is to think about and to relate with wild other as, okay, like, how do we make it more experience near? How do we build the tension around it? The powerful thing has been said. And how do we do the wild other now in a way that can't be repeated? How do we do it? And that's an invocation. That's by way of invocation. I work a lot in my client work with spontaneous imagery, spontaneously emerging images. Maybe that's a place to start. When you connect with that phrase, wild other, where does it bring you in terms of embodiment? And like, what's here now? Or maybe you could imagine a wild other coming into the studio here, kind of fireside. What are we seeing? How do we get it inside of us? How do we build the tension with it? Where can it bring us?
For me, I feel two things. On the one hand, the image of the king on the broomstick really is sticking for me. And I feel like there is a really important element to that aspect of the wild other in our culture, where we're all so stiff. We're all so scared to be the one who makes the little bit of an edgy joke in the room. And when we've talked about like being ecstatic, like ecstasy, and how like we kind of look down on ecstasy in our culture, not the drug, but like just the state of pure ecstasy. And it's like, that's our birthright. Then also playing and making jokes, and there's just feels like such a rich element to that, where it's like shaking off the cobwebs and the crystallizing structures of our body, of our psyches, of our hearts, all of it. And just like, what does Blake unobstructed feel like? What jokes would he say? And there feels like such a deep well that comes through that. And then on the other hand, alongside the king on the broomstick, there's just like this feeling kind of in my lower root area of just like this deep kind of dark forest energy, like in the middle of the forest. And this feels like a very like deep well of this kind of wild other energy. And and this is maybe a bit more intimidating and a bit more scary, because I don't know what's going to happen if I give myself to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you shared that, I had this impulse to, grab your head in an intense way, not a painful way, as like, if you watch lion cubs or something like that, fiercely play, it's very they're not hurting each other, but it is fierce and strong. And to me, I love when a man can get into that space of a hug. It's not an A-frame hug, one of those A-frame hugs, but it was like this, grab your head and kind of, I'm going to bring you into that space. And it's not a domesticated hug. That was a spontaneous image that arose when he brought me into the dark forest. I'm thinking, I'm feeling into a wild hug, unencumbered by, oh, well, if he squeezes me, I might fart.
Yeah.
Or that just kind of constant thing. So I'm thinking about the king on a broomstick farting, bestowing the fierce hugs, the wild hugs.
We need those hugs.
Yeah.
Those are the hugs where we truly feel like we're together in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, there's a lot of images that show up in the feeling into the wild other. Some of them feel like they might be a little bit challenging or tricky to name. The one that feels present for me and feels quite real in my experience is this phrasing of quiet immensity. And I know for myself that, like, in being a person who's in so many ways given myself to sort of ceaseless movement, like today hanging out with Blake, I was just like moving nonstop. I'm just like, my body is just moving and I'm just loving it and moving and loving it. And sometimes coming into quietness and listening to stillness, I just get so fidgety. I just get so like, and then, the feeling of just being utterly pummeled by my mind, just like the ceaselessness of mind. Just, wow. And I know for myself, that's one of the interesting sort of core mysteries of just like that capacity to like see myself thinking and to feel zero control over being able to have really any say over the next thought that arises, and just like the ceaselessness of thought. And I feel like the kind of edge for me there is like some of the moments where, say, like I look up at the sky, like it does elicit for me the sense of the wild unknown. Like sometimes like my tongue will come out and I was like, oh my God. And, like being out under the stars is another example of that, where it's just like coming into like true vast space. For me, that's very quiver inducing. And that feeling of meeting something that's so big, so immense. And there's a deep wild unknown, I feel, or a deep wild other in the sort of quiet immensity. And I don't have a deep feeling like I've got my handle on that, to be honest.
Thinking about a moment being in the middle of a conflict, a deep conflict, one of those nuclear ruptures in relationship. And the content, it's like this Clockwork Orange thing where the brain is getting zapped with ideas about how to be right or to make my point. And the intensity it's thronging. My mind is thronging, my body is thronging, and everything about it is very much upward. It's very uprooting intensity for me. And this is another moment to quiver, where there's been these moments periodically where I'll suspend my urge to say stuff and to be right and just be in the tension field and just in a way have it rip me apart. And to me, this is like a fierce surrendering moment of I'm going to be in the acid bath of this tension and just let it rip me apart.
Yeah.
and just kind of die in the moment and kind of show to the other person who's hopefully at this moment not talking either. But we're in the intensity.
Yeah.
And they can like somehow see that I'm dying. And then it can take us somewhere.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That is a wild other, isn't it? It's like death can be a wild other.
Yeah.
You know, I'm dying here.
Yeah.
Can you see that I'm dying here?
For sure. Yeah. And that really brings to mind something too we were touching on before we started recording, which is like how sort of nauseating non-dual spirituality can be.
Non-dual spirituality. Yes. Is that dualistic, DHR?
It would appear so. One might assume from the name. But like, I think the thing that really comes alive for me there is it's like the impulse to like claim that nothing is happening when we take those moments of silence. Like, I love your phrasing, like the acid bath. It was just like, we take these moments of silence and it's like, life is fucking pulsing with like things that are happening. Like, you know, like that one chapter of your book that I was reading, you know, I had like all these riffs on like morphogenesis, I think, and just like the way that evolution's on the move, and you know, there's like the rhizomes. There's just like in the moments of quiet, there's so much that's happening. Like life is just brimming with like all of these creative potentialities. And so it really feels like it can be such a farce, you know, the way that like a lot of sort of non-dual spirituality is peddled, because it's sort of like this sort of desire towards an idealization of like the nothing.
Yeah.
And yet like in quiet immensity or in silence, it's actually like you hear the symphony of the acid bath or the alkaline bath. Like you hear the flux and the flow and the farts and the, you know, it's just like, that's where it's all even more revealed in a sense, or maybe it's not more revealed. Maybe that's just a sloppy way of saying it, but I think y'all get what I'm laying down.
It's very visceral. You know, I even saw myself stepping in like a peat bog, you know, like mud and this, and, you know, the whole microbiome that my favorite term now for embodiment is swarming. Like because we are a swarm of molecular identities, we're a swarm of cells. And, you know, it's weird to like even assert that we're anything that approximates singular. Like I am a swarm. You know, and the swarm that I am now is going to be different than the swarm that I am in 2 minutes or 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So I really like this kind of thronging, swarming. It's like, and we could say, yeah, with non-dual, well, it's all, I do vibe with this idea that, you know, somehow the nothing is transcendent and somehow outside of the something, somehow outside of the swarm, or that it's prior to the swarm. But, you know, who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all just interpenetrating forever. It's all just tension. I mean, it's like, again, back to the tension. If you say non-dual, where's the tension?
Yeah.
If tension is the fabric of life in the universe, how can you divorce it and say, well, it needs to have some tension with something else? It's like, if there's no tension, there's no growth.
That's very interesting.
If there's nothing, it's just nothing forever, I suppose. Like, how do you accommodate for a nothing, and then what? Then there's a something. Then as soon as you have something, that's dual, right? Yeah, it's wild, that stuff. Wild. Yeah. And then there can be this anti-performativity in the spiritual traditions and in non-dual spirituality, where it's kind of like authenticity is the gold standard for being and becoming, to be authentic. And to me, idealization kind of gets into that fabric as a burr, like to authentically what? Authentically me. And like I just say, if I'm authentic all the time, you guys might get really pissed off at me. You know, I might say, you know, like, stop looking at me like that. And like, You know, like I want to punch you in the face for talking so much, or, you know, I was just spacing out when you were talking. I was thinking about myself.
Boring.
You know, like I'm thinking about having turtle dick or something like that. You know, like I could be just, it could be, you know, it's ridiculous how complex and interpenetrating life is and how chaotic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, to just try to clean it up in an image of authenticity and say, oh, well, that person is just being performative. Well, what the fuck? We're always performing something. Life is performing. The universe is performing. They're making forms.
Yeah.
Morphology, morphogenesis, producing new forms, performing, making forms, breaking them down. I hate this anti-performativity stuff. It's boring.
And acting like we're not trying to.
Yeah, acting like we're not trying to. Okay, so then now you're going to perform your authenticity? Like it's better? Like,
Yeah.
But it's like another layer of authenticity. It's like, and it's leaning into the inner attention. So like I can lean into my inner attention right now and say like, yeah, we're having a great conversation as bros, and I know we're being recorded, and I want to sound good in a way.
Yeah.
And I want to have interesting thoughts. And it's like not pretending that's not a real thing, but in acknowledging that, it like creates another layer of space where I can look at that and be like, and that's so okay. And it's like through that permission slip and the okayness that it almost like smooths some of that tension out. And I'm able to relax into it more. And I feel like everything that we've talked about today, and the wild other and the king, and it's such an invitation for me to fully like just embrace life and the aliveness and the symphony of within the acid bath, and just like all of the little flavors in the tension points and you know, the in-betweens. I really just want to soak it all in.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. So inspiration that's recently come back into my field is this guy named Ido Portal. I was telling Blake a little about Ido Portal. For any of you who don't know, he's like an Israeli move guy. He's like moving all the time.
yeah.
He's just, for me, he's just like one of these guys who just like epitomizes like a really unique facet of genius. He's just completely all in on doing his thing. And he put some stuff out there recently, which I've been kind of like chewing on a little bit. And he was kind of riffing on this idea of really studying like what's choosing inside of us. Like, how do we make choices? And he made this really interesting point that like when you're going along with something that you want to do, in a sense, there's no choice involved. You want to do it. But when something is happening that you don't really like, that's when you can really start to practice sort of at the play of like, what choice do I want to make around this? And it's a really interesting little thought experiment, because I notice for me, when I think about like, you know, authenticity, you know, and I think about all these different choices that I can make in regards to like, you know, do I want to punch you in the face? Do I want to make a silly joke? Do I want to like talk about flying coyote dicks again? Like, am I going to bring in the octopus that I saw when we were talking about the wild unknown, or like all these different things, you know? And it's like, it's really interesting to feel like in the sort of tension of life, like to really play with the sense that there's these choices. And I feel like even empowering that is sort of like this beautiful recognition that there's some form of power we're playing with. Some yes, some no, some sort of like wiggle room inside of the self that can make choices. And there's something about that self sense that there needs to be conditions that we don't like that precipitate the feeling that we're going to be making a choice.
That leads me into curiosity about isolation, men and isolation. Because, yes, something about the choice factor makes me think about, well, why is it that so many men are choosing the path of isolation inside of their work? So many men that are workaholics. Those workaholics out there that totally aren't Brian, you know, all those workaholic men out there, you know, those other guys out there. I just want to talk about men in isolation and courage. I don't know, like, where does that take you? Where does that discussion about isolation? What are you thinking?
It takes me initially, I just think about, I'm 24 years old and I work with a lot of younger men, like 16, 18, late high school, college, and also just talking with other people and seeing trends, like the amount of young men, and I guess men in general, who aren't, having as much sex, and a lot of the people that I'm working with who kind of are giving up on intimacy and having a girlfriend, and there's such like a deep soulful grief there of like the life that I imagined versus like this and what I'm dealing with. And yeah, I mean, at the core, it feels like this deep divorce to the wild other. I know we keep coming back to this, but the willingness to lower our drawbridge, and through time, hundreds and hundreds of years of these patterns being passed down, and then also the evolution of pop culture and technology and these things like pornography and social media that definitely aren't doing us any good. But we've been so divorced from this wild other, and I think many of us have been hurt when we have extended it. Like when you were talking about when you asked to be blessed and then you were hurt by other men, like something like this happens and there's no space at all to hold that, to catch that. And then we're just like, well, if that's what happens, then fuck that. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to become the lone wolf. I'm going to
bless myself.
I'm going to bless myself.
Check it out. I'm blessing myself. I'm working so hard. I'm reading all the things. I'm listening to Huberman every day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one side of the coin. And there's the other side of the coin. It's like the deep grief.
Yeah. Absence.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels to me like the theme of isolationism really brings to mind the uniquely precarious moment that we're in. Because we are in a uniquely precarious moment in the sense that, we've never had this level of technological sort of intervention in our lives. And one idea that I've also been really kind of contemplating for many, many years, this comes from Yuval Noah Harari. He was kind of riffing on like religions and sort of like the contributions of major religions. And he was basically saying something to the effect of like, religions really haven't played like a deciding role in people's lives for some time. Like the main drivers of human behavior change are technologies. It's our phones, it's being on computers, it's YouTube, it's pornography. It's sort of all these things that are putting us in this deep relationship with computers, really, like time in front of screens. And like, even for myself, like if you had asked me like 6-7 years ago, like, oh, would you choose to live a life where you're looking at your computer screen 8 hours a day? I'd be like, fuck no, I'm going to stay out, out here in this crazy forest here. And yet, like, there's an interesting sort of adaptation process that goes along with like the willingness to meet sort of the heartbeat of the zeitgeist and where we are right now. And so I feel like it's a really interesting sort of challenge, like an evolutionary challenge we're in, to like simultaneously, I'd say on the one hand of grandiosity, like I love this idea, like, the shamans of every era have used the highest technology available to kind of simulate spiritual awakening. So maybe in our own ways, we all have that. Here we are like using technology to sort of simulate things that are alive and moving through us. And so there's some beautiful blessings and advantages that come with that. And at the same time, there's this deep perilous sense that there's something about what's moving through the sort of transhuman kind of zeitgeist is deeply fucked up. And it seems to sort of be isolationary sort of by its very nature at this point. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like, we're at this really interesting sort of choice point or threshold where we really have to like start like putting our feet on the ground and like really seeding a culture of like, hey, do we really want this? And what's right relationship to this? And another idea there that I've been thinking about is there's just the idea of sequencing within one's day. Like, does one check social media first and then do creative stuff? It's like, that's probably the wrong order. It's like creative stuff and then social media. It's like, maybe there's these little ways where we get to refine like, okay, what's the right relationship to this thing that really feeds like the humaning that we want to do to say bring us into connection, get us together, link up in physical places, do things in real time and space, and then have technology be like a second or third kind of order of business in regards to somehow amplifying that or supporting that. But it just seems like a huge piece of the isolation piece is like technology has become primacy. And it just seems like it's become so phenomenally addictive and will likely just become dramatically more addictive as like hyper stimuluses and AI algorithms just hack our brains, like even more so that we really got to get the order right in terms of like what brings us joy, what brings us health, what brings us together, and how to use all this stuff that we have access to really make sure that it's supporting that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like there's this force to make memes of us, to kind of give us only the content that is the same or slightly different than our current identity structure, with a kind of canal of memes coming from the algorithm that, these capitalistic flows going through those canals, and then we just become there's this force of becoming becoming the same in different canals and silos. And there's that sense also in therapy sometimes where there's so much specialization where it really does feel like there's a force where certain people only want to see people that identify and have the same identity that they do in a very similar story. And I think that's one of the dangers that we're faced with is just like becoming memes and just saying the same stuff with people that say similar stuff and just propagating the memes.
Yeah.
And in the end, I just feel like it's just also vapid.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's just like an echo chamber, and what's real, and it's all just so fast. And the identities they're both rigid and too fast and mutating too quickly, and it's just like so much noise. So I'm feeling into the noise reduction function of, the cerebellum is doing that. The cerebellum also does sequencing. I don't want to just keep on talking about the cerebellum. But the noise reduction function, like we're just going to be lost in the noise if we don't actively cultivate a noise reduction function. And by that, I don't mean just shut up and be quiet and meditate all the time.
Right.
Sometimes cutting through the noise, and I guess the paradox with noise reduction is sometimes you got to be loud to reduce the noise. That's where I go with it.
Yeah, it brings me to this feeling that I've been having a lot recently with AI and just the way that it's exponentially advancing, and 2 years from now it's going to be, we can't even imagine, is like this kind of looking out into this abyss and recognizing that like now is the time to be learning to turn the phone off sometimes and to find spaces of quietness or loudness, but really to cut through the noise, like you're saying. Like now is that time, and really feeling this kind of wartime archetype. I think there is a really powerful lens to see our time through the lens of war, and maybe not only doing that, but I think there's a flavor of that can be actually really empowering and leading to a lot of really inspired action of like, now's the time to sharpen our swords. Now's the time to train our attention, to learn how to be creatives, maybe in the internet, and not get lost in it, to be creators and not stuck in consumption.
Nicely said. Maybe the last question is a bit of a funny question. Maybe it's a deep question. Maybe it's all of the above, none of the above. If we were activists, us three, what would we be activists of?
Oh, that's funny. The first thing that popped to my mind was chi. Yeah. Just getting people outside and breathing and moving and shaking it off and just taking in the beauty of nature. I mean, I think nature for me is primacy.
Nature.
Yeah.
This is my answer in this moment. I would be an activist of pornography awareness. I feel that's a really that's a big elephant in the room in our current time. That's going to continue to really become more of a well-known problem for a lot of people, especially young people growing up right now.
Yeah, and there's going to be hotter and hotter bots.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, and VR technologies and
AI girlfriends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think playfulness is one of my primaries. I talked with David Bridell, my clown teacher trainer, and he offered this model of activism that was an alternative to, activism that's sort of in your face and can lean towards moral superiority. The clown activist is one that humanizes. Holds up a mirror to our faults and our failings. And I really think that playfulness can really set us free and bring us towards peace and mutual humanity. And the other piece for me is public grieving rituals. So those are some pieces that I'm thinking about. Yeah, just thinking about how to do transformation on a bigger scale, in a way that doesn't turn off massive amounts of people as well.
Yeah.
It's really pro-humanity and pro-collaboration. Yeah. It matters to me, that question.
Yeah. That reminds me of the isolation piece. Like right now, I feel like a lot of people feel like their choices are go out with a bunch of bros and get hammered on the weekend, or like go to some weird Kundalini activation ceremony thing. It's like those are the two choices we have, and there needs to be this middle ground. And I feel like that's what you're talking about with kind of making these conversations more attractive to the masses, more approachable.
Yeah. Well, we're reaching a close now. And is there anything else that the two of you want to say? Anything else that we want to say?
Well, I'll close by saying, you brought your book. I'm going to just do shameless plugging to bless up my brother here, do a little blessing round. It was really, really fun to feel your physical book, like the hard copy of it, and just to feel like the weightiness of it. And with my partner, Emma, we opened to a passage. You kind of invited a sort of oracleizing. And there was this passage around the egg and morphogenesis and unpredictable alliances. And I kid you not, if anyone is listening to this, it's one of those passages, you literally could study it for a whole week, just sentence by sentence. It's just deep umami of just wow, this is hardcore in the best way ever. So I just really want to celebrate you for a moment for putting in that time. Something else that's been percolating in our field is you mentioned, I think twice, maybe more, but in a very loving and non-hubristic way, that you'd been getting up at 4:30 every single morning and doing 4:30 to 8:30. And
4 years.
For 4 years. And that, if that's not inspiring, I don't know what is. That is freaking inspiring, man. And that's been reverberating through our fields and just what it takes to bring through a labor of love. And so I just really want to bless that 4-hour window that you committed to be at the forge and to do your research and to really toil with the creative muse moving through you. It's really, really special. And it's amazing just to get a single glimpse into something that holds so much profundity. And yeah, so thank you for doing that, man.
Thanks for modeling blessing. I had a quiver down here somewhere that was just so lovely, just kind of like, I'll take that in.
Yeah.
I'll take that in.
Yay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll echo everything that DH just said. I've been talking like to everyone about like, I think I'm going to get up at 4:30 to 8:30 every day. And I feel like there's something that we can all kind of take from that of like, what would it be like for every single person on earth to do that? That could do that, you know, and to like breathe into, I have a piece of art in me that wants to come through and I'm going to dedicate 4 hours for 4 years every day. So yeah, I want to echo everything that you said. It's such a beautiful 4-minute mile of dedication to the craft. So thank you. And if anyone's still listening to the podcast and listen to the whole thing, thank you. And you are definitely someone who is craving the rottening and leaning into tension if you haven't turned it off. And so just encouraging all of you to find those pockets of tension and please lean in, because that's kind of where we're at as a collective species right now, is leaning into the rottening that's happening now.
Rock and roll and rot.
Rot and roll.
Rock and rolls, baby. Flying coyote dicks.
All right. Thanks all. Thank you too so much for showing up. It's been just an honor and blessing to be here by the fireside and take Boundless Body mobile. So this is just, I'm just so stoked to have had this conversation with you.
Yay.
Thank you.
Right.
Woo! We did it.
Thank you for listening to the Boundless Body podcast. Please like us, share, subscribe, and until next time, stabilize, catalyze, and thrive.